I got you. I freaking got you. Yeah, I lured you in with the idea of Xenogears. Yeah, lured you in like a master fisherman called me Jeremy Wade. Reeling you in. Just like Square Enix keeps trying to tease us all by drip-feeding Xenogears stuff over the last year, and now dropping the soundtrack on streaming services. But I lured you in with the ideas of a Xenogears video, yeah? Dragged you in, so that I can talk about the state of the video games industry! God, doing that intro with a sore throat was not the idea. Oh, Xenogears release date. Okay, wanted to check my math on this. It has been 26 years since Xenogears released on February 11th, 1999 for the PlayStation 1. The start of a journey of games that would span multiple consoles, different timelines, universes, whatever you want to call them, leading up and culminating in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 a little under 2 years ago. Don't tell me it's been that long already. I think it was more like a year and a half, but don't quote me on that. And it's weird and kind of wild to think about that the series can take its roots in a game all the way from back then. And just the overall emotional roller coaster this series has really undergone, going into different forms, different companies, different etceteras, all so that a vision could be made manifest and a story unraveled. It all began back in the day with Xenogears, and I feel that a large part of this channel's identity has been tied up in Xenoblade because I truly do love the series. I started with Xenoblade X, moving to Xenoblade 2, and I fell in love with both of those games. And eventually I was able to share my love with a lot of people out there with this channel about Xenoblade Chronicles 1, 2, and 3, and even X. You may be asking, well, Jmulls, how does this tie back into the state of the video games industry that you love to yap on about so much? And if you've only really seen my Xenoblade content, you haven't really seen me be analytical or negative about something, or even about my rants in the video games industry. Well, allow me to, wet your whistle with this video, if you will, because Xenogears console exclusivity still pisses me off. Now, I've been a gamer through most of my life, and whether or not you game on PC or console, chances are that shapes your opinions on the industry as a whole. Certain things in practice have become normalized and almost expected, and a big thing for consoles has been exclusivity, but also backwards compatibility being tied into, essentially, the company running the console, whether or not with the next console if they want to be gracious enough to make the games backwards compatible for the new console. PlayStation has been up and down in this regard, where early versions of the PS3 were fully backwards compatible with the PS1 and PS2. So having a game like Xenogears on the PS1 was no biggie because you could just play it on the latest, greatest hardware. Well, ish, if you want to consider the PS3 greatest hardware, but yeah. It was at least backwards compatible. So you had game preservation like that and the ability to play these games. But then later iterations of the PS3, and especially when we jumped into the PS4 and now PS5, backwards compatibility for Sony has been spotty at best. Xbox used to be terrible in this regard, but they have since, course corrected. And Nintendo's just a cluster because they can't settle on what kind of interface they want to use for their games, whether or not a cartridge, what size the cartridge, what shape the cartridge is, or if they want to use a disc, or like a GameCube disc, or whatever. But especially nowadays, for a series that has become so known and talked about and loved as Xenoblade, a lot of people, myself included, want to go back to the series' origins. Before Monolith was picked up by Nintendo, before all of that, to the times of Xenosaga and Xenogears, to see where it all began and to experience this story for ourselves, faults and all. And, well, a reality of the console scene becomes ever more clear, and opinions that I've kind of held for over the past few years that have been kind of here or there, or at least spotty at best, become far more crystallized. I am really starting to hate consoles. And let's talk about console exclusivity, because Xenogears is exclusive to older PlayStation platforms. And most people can't obtain Xenogears legally because it's locked on old, dead hardware. So we're just all patiently awaiting for corporations to decide that there is enough money in it so that they can remaster or remake it or maybe even port it. This is not a unique idea to Xenogears or Xenosaga. This is something that happens with a lot of older console games, because the argument that game preservation is most effective with physical games makes a lot of surface level sense, right? You own the game, you are holding it. No suit or some jabroni from a corporation is going to come to where you live, grab your disc, Fortnite dance on you, and then leave with it. That's not going to happen. Or if it does, you'll have a sick TikTok video to make. But so long as you keep the disc in a good enough state and you have the needed hardware, well, your game is preserved and you can play it for, well, pretty much in perpetuity. And I've made a video not too long ago about how I feel that PC gaming on the whole, and at least with the current trends of the video games industry, is becoming even better than ever before, but also just better overall than consoles when it comes to preserving games. Because a game preserved in a physical case can only really be enjoyed by one person, realistically, unless you want to like host a game party or something. And you need to maintain the physical apparatus that the game is conveyed in. You need to make sure the disc or cartridge is in a good enough of a state, and that it never ever receives enough damage to destroy or patently alter the experience. You also need to make sure you have the needed hardware to input that game into so that you can enjoy said game. That hardware is not being made anymore. There's limited numbers of them going out and about, and eventually, over time, chances are most of them will break eventually, or become inoperable for whatever reason, and scarcity will happen. Does that mean all of them will break eventually? Maybe not, but way down the line probably. But the idea is, yeah, for you, and in terms of a selfish perspective, it is preserved. But if that game is stored on the internet, or if that game is stored on PC, then all you need to do, Control-C, Control-V, and you have another copy. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but you get the gist of it. Now, obviously, there's a lot of, like, loopholes when it comes to, you know, digital games and stuff like that, or games on Steam. I'm not talking about that. But say I want to go play a game from the 1980s, Marathon, for instance. I can go get that game. That game is preserved. I don't have to wait for Bungie or whoever to decide it's in their best interest to port the game or remake it or remaster it or bastardize it with some kind of modernization. I don't need to wait for that to happen. The game exists and it's out there. And when a game does not have that in its ability or its repertoire, well, we run into these situations where we're just now waiting for Square Enix to decide it's in their best interest to preserve this game, Xenogears, or for another company with Xenosaga. And generally speaking, when it comes to preservation, I don't like putting the onus and having it be reliant on corporate greed. Maybe eventually down the line we will get something Xenogears related, whether or not that's a port, a remake, or a remaster. In fact, I've predicted that we will get something along those lines for a little bit now. And you can read into them bringing the Xenogears soundtrack to streaming services all you want, and think that they're gearing up to something. Get it? Xenogears gearing up? And maybe that is the case, and maybe that is what they are doing. It is hard to know and impossible to predict. But in this current state, if you want to play the game legally, you either have to jump around a whole bunch of loopholes, not loopholes, but a whole bunch of hoops, to try and score yourself older hardware alongside a copy of the original game that you're almost certainly going to have to get secondhand anyways, or you have to already own it. I don't think that's a sustainable model when it comes to game preservation, because corporations on the whole do not care about game preservation unless it's in their best interest. And right now, it just isn't. They care more about making money. They care more about profit margins and getting as much money as humanly possible for as little effort as humanly possible. That's what they care about. That is their function. But I also care about game preservation. These experiences are worthy enough to last and to be experienced for generations to come. Whether it's new people looking to the franchise to discover the roots of it, or people from back then who want to re-experience those memories all over again. These are stories and gameplay experiences and little like monikers and little snippets of game history that should be preserved. And I think when we look at the current state of the console market, as well as the current state of the video games industry, console gaming is just simply not an effective means of long-term game preservation. And this is in my wheelhouse. Xenoblade, or Xeno overall. I want to play Xenogears. I want to play Xenosaga. And right now, I'm kind of, well, in a position where I'd either have to overpay for old hardware in an old game, or do it through dubious methods. I prefer to do stuff legally. And I think patiently waiting around for corporations to decide that it's in their best interest to preserve a game from years gone by is not an effective or sustainable model, especially when it comes to game preservation. And I think this is one of the major reasons that I've really started to gravitate to PC gaming in the last year or so. I've always been a PC gamer ever since I was young, but I played scattered games here and there. I still owned a lot of console games back then. I mainly used my PC for stuff like MMORPGs or like Minecraft or whatever. Nowadays, I just find consoles really limiting, and the consequences and the negative repercussions of the console market continuing to kind of like prosper are becoming ever more resonant to me. And every time I think about this topic, every week for the last few weeks, I just come to a simpler, more clear understanding that the console market itself is anti-consumer. Maybe that was obvious to you for a long time, but as someone who grew up with consoles, who has multiple consoles in my immediate vicinity right now, when you grow up in a certain sphere of influence, certain things become normalized even when, in reality, they probably shouldn't have been. And we can understand why certain things are the way they are. The PS3 architecture, from my understanding, is abhorrent and really tricky to work with, which is why we rarely ever get PS3 ports or remakes or remasters. Nintendo, for lack of a better phrase, is way understandable in this regard, because, well, a lot of their older hardware use different sizes or versions of cartridges that just simply aren't compatible with the input devices that the Switch runs. Or, you know, the GameCube, Wii, and Wii U use discs instead of the Switch cartridge. So, unless Nintendo wants to ship out or create a device that has all of their inputs from all those years by, unless they want to make that product, then it just makes financial sense for them to stick with one thing. Duh. Xbox is using backwards compatibility as a law, saying, hey, if you already have all of these Xbox games because you loved us back during the Xbox original or the 360 days, well, good news, we went back essentially one by one and made it so you can play all your games again on the newer hardware, and for a lot of them, we'll even throw in some bonuses like higher frame rates or higher resolutions. They're using it as a lure, but remember back in the days when they're announcing the Xbox One, backwards compatibility was a big issue, and they chose not to do it back then. So they had to go back and essentially one by one with all of these games make them backwards compatible after they realized how much they just absolutely flubbed and dropped the ball of all the success they had built up at that time with the 360. We can't change the past. And funnily enough, that's one of the major themes of Xeno as a series. You can't change the past, you can only really look to the future, and do things in the present to continue walking into the future. And I think a real big conversation needs to happen across the industry, and especially amongst consumers, because at the end of the day, corporations aren't going to care about this because they are after money. And if they don't think it's profitable enough, they're not going to do it. It's really simple logic for them. But I think the industry on the whole, and especially consumers, needs to have a long, hard look in the mirror and say, is this the model we want to continue to endorse and support going into the future? How sustainable is this? And how much worse can game preservation get in its current state? The desire that physical games and physical is a good method of preservation works in the short term. It's understandable because you're physically holding it. That creates a sense of reassurance, right? That just makes sense. But as someone who I can look to my right and see multiple stacks of PS2 games I now no longer have access to play because I don't have a PS2 that works anymore, and my PS3s that were backwards compatible with the PS2 all broke, I am now staring at glorified paperweights. And you can make the argument, go out and get another PS2. Well, eventually that thing will break for whatever reason, because, well, things break. And it sucks, but that's a reality of the world we live in. Hardware's not designed to last forever on the whole. Things happen. Things break. That's only human. My point is, how sustainable is that for the future? Because Xenoblade got a lot of popularity with Xenoblade 2. So they went back to port Xenoblade 1 with Definitive Edition to the Switch. They didn't have to do that. Imagine a world where the Switch has Xenoblade 2 and 3, but they never went back for for Definitive Edition. You would have the first game in the series on the Wii or the Wii U with backwards compatibility, wink wink nudge nudge, and you would have the 2 latest entries in the series not on it. Think of it like that. Xenoblade 1 would be on the Wii, so if you wanted to play all of Xenoblade, not even Xenogears or Xenosaga, just Blade, you would need a Wii U at least for Xenoblade 1, backwards compatibility, Xenoblade X, and then you would need the Switch for 2 and 3. But because they chose to port Xenoblade 1, when it comes to Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3, most people don't talk about this issue because we happen to have all of them on this hardware. What happens when the Switch 2 comes out? What happens if the Switch 2 isn't backwards compatible? You may say, and rightfully so, I'll just keep my Switch. Alright, 30, 40 years down the line, your Switch breaks. They don't make them anymore. You have to rely on someone else's Switch that you buy on some website. Is this sustainable? Is this a long-term solution? I don't think it is. I don't think PC gaming is perfect. Digital gaming has a lot of things we need to work out, especially when it concerns ownership, and especially when it concerns Steam, which is the primary marketplace on PC for gaming. But despite all of those things that can and need to be worked on, I still think it is the better place to preserve games. And I think we're running into this issue with Xenogears and now Xenosaga as a direct consequence of decades of this practice of relying on backwards compatibility for newer and newer hardware. All of that became normalized. People come to expect it, and that has become the norm. I would argue that it shouldn't be the norm, but it is. But it doesn't have to continue to be the norm. There is no real easy solution or quick fix for this. This is something where the industry on the whole needs to slowly alter and change and course correct over a period of time. And it's why I hope PC gaming continues to grow and expand and become more normalized and popularized. It's not perfect. There are some kinks that we need to fix. But I think in terms of long-term stability and backwards compatibility and game preservation, as I argued not too long ago, I think it's the better place. Because on a 26-year anniversary for a game that started one of my favorite franchise of all time, Xenoblade can find its origins and its roots, in terms of a lot of things, story, and, well, even the name, back to Xenogears. But because of the nature of what has happened to my consoles, but also the video games industry, 26 years later, there's no practical solution to the question of game preservation because of the nature of the video games industry and its ever-evolving state and the nature of the market and how it's changed and altered over the last couple of decades. And it's such a shame because I would love to play Xenogears and to experience that story. I've listened to some of the songs, and they're beautiful, they're immaculate. I know I would love the game, and it just kind of sucks that I don't really have access to it right now. Same thing with Saga, and I think every now and then, especially when it concerns games that we either really love, cherish, or want to play, this message needs to be, well, remembered and reminded. And with that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day. Go play some video games if you can. If you've played Xenogears, let me know how you think about it, and what your favorite memory of Xenogears is. I'd love to hear your stories and to hear your perspectives. And let me know what you think about the point of the video overall. Stay safe, have a great day. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when I upload and stream in the future. Stay safe, and I'll see you all again next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.